I didn't think a sunset could bankrupt a man. But that's exactly what happened. And yeah, if you've ever had one of those neighbors who thinks money makes them smarter than nature, you're gonna understand this real quick. So here's the deal. I live out on the high plains, not the cute postcard version. I'm talking real wind, the kind that doesn't just move air. It hunts you, it screams through gaps, it finds weaknesses, and if you give it one, it will absolutely punish you for it. My place has been in the family for 3 generations, working ranch, cattle, long winters, the whole thing. And along the North Ridge, my grandfather, old school, no-nonsense kind of man, planted this double row of trees about 50 years ago, blue spruce, ponderosa pine. Not for looks, not for privacy, but because he understood something most people don't. Wind is predictable, and if you control how it moves, you control everything else: snow, temperature, even survival. Now, to someone from the city, those trees just look like a messy wall, uneven, wild. But out here, that's a living snow fence. It slows the wind just enough so the snow drops where you want it. My pasture, and not where you don't. Your house, your barn, your entire life. Those trees were basically a shield, invisible, but absolutely critical. Enter my neighbor. Let's call him Brandon Cole. Silicon Valley money, tech exit, probably made more in a year than my ranch does in a decade. He buys the property just south of mine, 10 acres of what used to be open grazing land. And within 6 months, he builds this thing. All glass, steel, angles that don't make sense. Looks like a museum decided to land in the middle of cattle country. I didn't have a problem with that. People can build whatever they want on their land. But Brandon, he had a problem with my trees. First time he brought it up, he was standing there on his deck, holding one of those expensive wine glasses like he was auditioning for a commercial. And he goes, "Hey man, your trees are kind of killing the light over here." I laughed. I actually thought he was joking. He wasn't. "They block the golden hour," he says, like that's a real problem out here. I told him straight. Those trees aren't decoration. They're functional. They're the reason this ridge doesn't turn into a wind tunnel every winter. He smiles, but it's that tight kind of smile, the one that says he's already decided you're wrong. "Yeah, but they look chaotic," he says. "I mean, no offense, but it's kind of an eyesore." That's when I realized this wasn't about trees. This was about control, about someone used to shaping their environment suddenly being told, "No, this part isn't negotiable." I explained it again, slower this time. Without those trees, wind speeds through that gap can hit 60 miles an hour, easy. And when that happens, the snow doesn't just fall. It travels, it stacks, it buries things. I told him, "You really don't want those trees gone." He actually laughed, like out loud, then hit me with, "I think you're overestimating how important they are. I mean, I get it. You've been here a long time, but there's a difference between tradition and efficiency." Translation: he thought I was some backward ranch guy clinging to old habits. Fine. I've been called worse. Weeks go by, and he keeps bringing it up, little comments, passive-aggressive stuff. Even offered to buy the view rights, whatever that means. I said no every time, firm, but polite, because here's the thing. Out here, you don't escalate unless you have to. Then October rolls around, and I'm busy moving cattle to winter pasture, long days, barely home. And that's when he made his move. I come back late Sunday afternoon, sun's dropping, wind's picking up just a little, and something feels off, like when you walk into a room and it's too quiet. I look up at the ridge, and my stomach just drops. The trees are gone. Not trimmed, not thinned, gone. 40 mature trees, cut clean, nothing left but stumps, thick ones too, decades old. I didn't even get angry right away. It was more like disbelief, like my brain hadn't caught up yet. I walk the line, measure it, 5 feet inside my property, no question, no ambiguity, and then I hear him. Brandon's up on his deck, same wine glass, same smug posture, watching the sunset like he just painted it himself. "Hey," he calls out, like we're neighbors sharing a barbecue. "Looks better, right?" I just stared at him, didn't say a word. He keeps going. "Don't worry, I'll compensate you for the timber, whatever it's worth." Seemed like the easiest solution. Easiest for who, right? That's when the anger finally showed up, but not loud, not explosive, just quiet, focused. Because see, people like Brandon think everything is a transaction. They think if they can afford the damage, They own the outcome. What they don't understand is, some systems don't care about money. Nature doesn't negotiate. And he had just removed the one thing standing between his house and a very, very long winter. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. Instead, I went inside, pulled up the long-range forecast, and when I saw what was coming, I just leaned back in my chair and thought, okay, we'll let this play out. Because sometimes, the best lesson isn't something you argue, it's something you experience. All right, let me pause the story right there for a second, because this is where a lot of people get it twisted. And if you don't understand this part, the rest of what happens might just sound like bad luck instead of what it really is, cause there's actually two things going on here. One legal, one psychological, and both of them matter more than you think. Now first, from a legal perspective, what Brandon did wasn't just rude, it was straight-up liability territory. Cutting trees that sit on someone else's land, even by a few feet, is considered property damage, and not the small kind. We're talking timber trespass in a lot of states, which can carry penalties way beyond just paying for the wood, sometimes double, sometimes triple damages depending on intent. And here's the kicker, mature trees? Those aren't priced like lumber at Home Depot. They're valued based on replacement cost, environmental function, even aesthetic impact, meaning one tree can run tens of thousands of dollars, not because of the wood, but because you can't just replace 50 years of growth overnight. According to standard procedure, you verify boundary lines, you get written consent, and you document everything. You don't just hire a crew and start cutting because you feel like it's your land. That's how people lose lawsuits, fast. Now let's talk psychology, because honestly, that's where this whole thing really started. This is a psychological trap, and it's common with people who come from high-control environments, corporate, tech, finance, where money solves most problems. Brandon wasn't reacting to trees, he was reacting to a loss of control. He buys this big piece of land, builds his dream house, and suddenly there's one thing he can't optimize, can't redesign, can't dominate, my trees. And instead of adapting, he reframes the situation. The trees are the problem. That way, removing them feels justified, even necessary. It's not about a sunset. It's about ego, about needing the world to match the picture in his head. And when someone like that hits resistance, they don't negotiate, they override, because in their experience, that usually works until it doesn't. And here's the part people overlook. Nature doesn't care about your narrative. It doesn't care what you think looks better or what you paid for your view. It only responds to physics, airflow, pressure, temperature. You remove a windbreak. You don't just change the scenery. You change the system, and systems, they always rebalance, one way or another. So yeah, I didn't sue him. Not yet. I just waited. And if you've lived out where I live, you know waiting isn't passive. It's part of the process. November rolled in soft, almost suspiciously calm, light winds, thin frost in the mornings, nothing dramatic. And Brandon, he was loving it. I'd see him out on that deck more often now, camera in hand, posting those golden hour shots like he'd unlocked some hidden level of life. The ridge was wide open now, no trees to interrupt the skyline. Just this clean, uninterrupted view, and I'll admit, it did look different, cleaner, maybe, but that's the thing about removing friction. It always feels good at first. Then December hit, and it didn't knock. It kicked the door in. First storm came in overnight, northern front, fast drop in pressure, and by midnight the wind had already started building. Not steady, but sharp, aggressive gusts, the kind that make your windows flex just a little. I stepped outside around 2 a.m. just to check things, and the first thing I noticed wasn't the snow. It was the sound. There was no break in it, no buffering, just this raw, uninterrupted roar coming straight over the ridge, and right then, I knew. That gap where the trees used to be, it wasn't a gap anymore, it was a funnel. By morning, the landscape had completely changed. Now normally, with the tree line intact, snow would pile up gently across my north pasture, forming these long, predictable drifts. Nothing dangerous, just controlled accumulation. But this time, it didn't stop there. The wind didn't slow down, it accelerated, it crossed my land, picked up loose powder, and just kept going, straight south, straight toward Brandon's place. And when fast-moving air hits a solid structure, it drops everything it's carrying. That's not revenge, that's physics. I drove out as far as I could after sunrise, but the road toward his house was already getting buried, not evenly, not like a blanket. This was targeted thick, compacted snow piling up in one specific zone: his driveway, his front yard, his entire ground floor. By noon, you could barely see the base of his house. It looked like it was sinking, like the land was swallowing it whole, and the wind just kept feeding it. Hour after hour, no break, no mercy. I went back home, kept the generator ready, checked the barn, made sure everything on my end was locked down. Because here's the part people don't think about. When systems shift, they don't just affect one person, they ripple, but my place. It was holding, exposed, yeah, but still functioning, because the rest of the terrain, the layout, the years of adjustment, it was built for this. His wasn't. Night came, and the temperature dropped even further. The snow hardened, not that soft powder anymore. This was dense, packed, almost like concrete. And that's when the real problem started for him. I found out later what it looked like from his side. First, the doors wouldn't open, completely sealed by the drift pressing up against them. Then the lower windows, floor-to-ceiling glass panels, started taking the load. You get enough weight pushing unevenly, something's going to give. Two of them cracked, not shattered all at once. Just these long, slow fractures creeping across the surface, like the house was under pressure it was never designed to handle. Then his HVAC system failed. Intake vents were buried deep, and once those are blocked, airflow stops, system shuts down. No heat, no circulation, just cold creeping in room by room. And remember, this is a house designed for aesthetics, not resilience. Open spaces, minimal insulation in certain sections, lots of glass, beautiful under normal conditions, completely vulnerable now. By the second day, he was trapped, couldn't get the doors open, couldn't clear the snow, too compact, too deep, and the plows? They couldn't even reach him. The drift wasn't just on the surface. It had formed a ridge across his entire access road, like a wall. I heard the call go out on the local channel. Request for assistance, possible structural hazard, occupant trapped. They had to bring in state resources, not because the storm was unusual, but because the house was in the worst possible position after those trees came down. National Guard showed up late afternoon. Tracked vehicles, slow approach, cutting through the drift like they were breaking into a bunker. They got him out, cold, shaken, probably still trying to process how fast things flipped. 1 week you're sipping wine watching sunsets. Next week you're getting pulled out of your own house like it's a disaster zone. Storm passed after that, but the damage didn't, because snow like that doesn't just disappear. It sits, it melts slow, and when it does, it seeps into everything: foundation, lower walls, insulation, places you don't see until it's too late. Spring came late that year. Ground stayed saturated, and when the thaw finally hit full swing, that's when the real cost showed up: water damage across the entire lower structure, shifting in the foundation, stress fractures that weren't there before, and insurance. Well, they don't like surprises, especially preventable ones. They sent an adjuster, did their inspection, and it didn't take long. Satellite images, property records, recent changes to the landscape, those stumps? Still visible, clear as day. And once they connected the dots, protective tree line removed, wind exposure increased, direct correlation to snow drift formation. That claim was dead on arrival, denied. Just like that. Because in their eyes, this wasn't an act of God. It was a man-made vulnerability, and they don't cover that. Now here's where things come back around. Because while all this was happening, I finally made my move, filed the claim for the trees, 40 mature specimens, decades of growth, functional land value, not just timber. And yeah, the number was significant. We're talking tens of thousands per tree when you factor in replacement, environmental role, and long-term impact. It wasn't revenge. It was accounting, pure and simple. He didn't fight it for long. Couldn't, really, between the denied insurance, the structural damage, and the legal claims stacking on top. The math just didn't work in his favor. Last I heard, he sold the property at a loss, not as a dream home, but as a teardown, stripped down to land value, the same land he thought he had improved. Funny how that works. As for me, I replanted the ridge this spring. Young trees, spaced carefully, same pattern my grandfather used. It'll take years before they're fully grown, I know that, but that's the thing about doing it right. You're not just building for yourself. You're building for whoever comes next. And the new folks who bought that place south of me, they came by last winter, brought cookies, thanked me for the trees, or at least for what they understood those trees meant. And yeah, the sunset still looks just fine, just filtered the way it's supposed to be. So yeah, that's the story. And if you're sitting there thinking, man, that escalated fast, you're right. But it didn't happen overnight. It just felt like it did because the consequences showed up all at once. The setup took months, even years, and honestly, situations like this happen way more often than people admit. Just usually on a smaller scale. A fence moved a few feet, a tree trimmed a little too aggressively. Someone deciding their comfort matters more than the system they're stepping into. And that's really what this comes down to. Not trees, not snow, but understanding the environment you're part of or choosing to ignore it. The lesson here is control is often an illusion, especially when you're dealing with natural systems. You can influence them, sure, work with them, even benefit from them. But the moment you assume you can override them without consequences, you're setting yourself up for a correction, and that correction doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about your budget, your intentions, or how nice your house looks at sunset. It just balances things out. Now let's bring it a little closer to home. Because even if you don't live on a ranch, even if you're in a suburb with an HOA breathing down your neck, the principle is the same. Shared environments come with invisible rules, sometimes written, sometimes not. You remove something that serves a function, windbreaks, drainage paths, even shade trees. You're not just changing your property, you're affecting the entire system around you. And people underestimate that all the time. They think, it's mine. Land, I can do what I want. And legally, sure, you've got rights. But those rights stop where damage to others begins. And that line? It's thinner than most folks realize. I've seen people get into serious trouble over things they thought were minor. Cutting roots that stabilized a shared slope, redirecting water runoff, even installing structures that changed wind patterns, stuff that sounds small, until it isn't. And by the time you notice the impact, it's already expensive, sometimes irreversible. And then there's the human side of it. Because what happened with Brandon, that wasn't just about ignorance, it was ego. It was the belief that success in one area translates to authority in all areas. And that's a dangerous mindset. Especially when you step into a place with its own rules, its own history, its own logic. This is a psychological trap. Thinking that because you can afford to fix a problem, you're allowed to create it. But the reality is, some problems don't scale with money, they scale with consequence. And by the time you're writing the check, the real cost has already been paid somewhere else. Time, stability, trust, or in his case, an entire house. And I'm not saying this to paint him as some villain either. I've thought about it a lot, and honestly, I think he believed he was improving things, making them cleaner, more efficient, more aligned with his vision. But that's the thing about perspective. It's limited, especially when you don't take the time to understand what came before you. Those trees weren't random. They were intention. They were knowledge, passed down, tested over decades, and he dismissed all of that because it didn't fit his aesthetic. And that's a mistake people make everywhere. Not just with land, but with communities, systems, even relationships. They walk in, see something they don't like, and instead of asking, why is this here? They jump straight to how do I change it? And sometimes, that question costs you everything. Now, if you take anything from this, whether you're dealing with neighbors, property, or just life in general, it's this: slow down before you remove something you don't understand. Ask questions, listen to people who've been there longer than you, because there's usually a reason things are the way they are, and even if you don't agree with it, that reason matters more than you think. And yeah, maybe you're wondering, should I have sued him right away? Should I have stopped it before it got that far? Maybe, but sometimes people don't learn from warnings, they learn from outcomes. And in this case, the outcome was undeniable. So now I'm curious, what would you have done? Would you have taken legal action immediately, or let things play out the way I did? Drop your thoughts below, because stories like this, they're not just entertainment, they're reminders that every action, especially the ones we think are small, has a ripple, and sooner or later, that ripple comes back.